Alright guys, now this is a Ford Exploder intake, which has a good reputation for making nice power. You'll notice the top design is offset, right? Which is much different than the older GT style, which is straight. Okay, it gives us a lot more room. They could make the ports larger in diameter, right? And take up as much. You still have the same amount of distance from front to back, but now you've canted everything back and forth. You got more room to fit everything in. What I think is amazing is how much larger those ports are. It is designed for a pretty heavy vehicle, right? But it has a really large port. Hold on a sec. Okay, that circular port, good for 316 CFM if everything was perfect in the world, right? Whereas the GT is more like 250 CFM, right? Because it's a much smaller port and it's an oval instead of a circle. Now I've seen where they've taken these and ported them professionally, and there's like practically no metal between the bores because there's not a lot of metal to begin with. I really didn't increase these in size much at all, just cleaned them up. Did I change the inside of the port? Yeah, quite a bit actually, and you'll be able to see when we look at the flow differences. Nice improvement was made. One of the things I liked about this is I've never done one of these before, so this was my first off chance to work on one of these. And because I had the E5TE all set up on the bench, I flowed 8, which is almost dead straight, verse 1, which is a pretty serious dog leg. I think 5 might be a touch worse. But in any case, that's what we're using. We're using 1 and we're using 8. And we're going to see how close all of that comes. And those two are also going to be tested on this, because I had the head on the bench. So I'm going to flow it on 8 on this one, and I'm going to flow it on 1 on this one, and see what kind of comparison. I mean, if you take a look, these ports are downright tiny. Tiny compared to these monsters. Okay? Let's show you with the calipers. Okay, going to be tough to do with only one hand. That's how much difference there is from the GT style, that's already been modified, to the Exploder style that's been modified. Okay, so these have a huge amount more area. So let's take a look at what they did. Okay, that's what the cylinder head did, intake-wise, right? Then I put the stock Exploder on it. So let's take a look at 500. We go from 225, drops down to 206.2 on number 1, 206.5 on number 8, which is much straighter. Still pretty darn close as far as flow. In fact, I think it's pretty amazing how close they really are, even though they're totally different shaped ports. That is one of the advantages to this style intake, is they made the ports with enough cross section that the angles that they're all flowing don't make that big a difference. If you remember what this one looked like stock, right? Before I did all my epoxy work and so forth to it, it was 28% different between my sharp dog legs to my straights. Huge difference, right? These are much closer together, stock-wise. And if we take a look at our swirl, between this swirl and this swirl, They are different, all right? I mean, we got a 1784 here and a 1050 there. Okay, 1570 here, 400 there. 2686, 2469. Okay, they're not the same, but they're not gonna be, because one of them is hitting the port, right, with this long sweep going into it. The other one's straight in. Okay? So that's where we're getting our swirl. It's how the air is actually entering the port. So these are the numbers I started with. And I worked my magic. Let's see how I did. Okay. If we take a look, right, this is the ported exploder. This is what we got. Plus 0.7, plus 2.2, plus 0.6, plus 2.1, plus 1.6, plus 0.5, plus 4.9, plus 7.6, plus 7.8, plus 9, plus 11. Okay, as you can see, it's a big port. So it doesn't really make a big difference until you start moving some air through it, and then you can get some nice gains. Now, number one's got the sharp dog leg in it. Okay? Let's do the pluses and minuses on 8. Okay. Number 8, plus 1.5 minus 0.1 plus 1.1 equals minus 0.8 plus 3 plus 5.9 plus 7.9 plus 7.6 plus 6.3 plus 8.1. Notice the straight one starts to pick up nicely at the top end, right? Now we can also compare our swirl from the ported to the non-ported, right? Let's see what we got. Little increase, big increase, good increase, 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 pretty much increase everywhere on that one. Let's take a look at this one. Small increase, same, small increase, small increase, small increase, small increase, small increase, except at the very top. Now somebody's going to say, hey Charlie, that wasn't even worth it for, 9, 8, 9, 11, 8. It's not worth it. I got news for you. If you're getting 8 CFM, now you got to remember how I'm measuring this. I've seen other guys flow these manifolds on the internet. They may flow it by itself and give you some ridiculous number that they flow. But that's not flowing through a cylinder head. This is flowing through a cylinder head that's flowing 230. Okay? So how much of a loss are you getting on this lower? Not much. In fact, this lower is working really well. Now let's compare this modded lower to the epoxied older style GT lower. I think you might be surprised how well this much smaller intake does. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, old GT with epoxy, right? Now what I'm taking is number 1 intake from the exploder and subtracting them from these. So this is plus or minus from the exploder, okay, to the GT. Equal minus 0.6 minus 1.2 minus 1.1 plus 0.7 minus 0.7 minus 5.8 minus 10.8 minus 9.8 minus 7 minus 7.1. Now somebody may say, well, that freaking stinks. That's a huge loss. Actually, it's really not if you consider how much tinier those ports are. It's actually quite good. And then we can take a look at our swirl numbers, right? Our swirl numbers here versus these swirl numbers. More swirl here, more swirl here. About the same. A little more here. Okay, let's take a look at number 8. Okay, let's compare our number 8. Number 8 is our straight port, right? Equal. Minus 0.9, minus 0.3, plus 0.9, plus 1.5, plus 0.8 equals minus 3.6, minus 2.3, minus 0.4, minus 3.3. Take a look at how close. Actually, in some instances, the straight port, the small straight port beats the large straight port. How does that make any sense? Well, I guess the velocity heading through it feeds that port better, doesn't it? Need to pay attention to velocity, guys. Super important. Let's take a look at our swirl from here to here. 7. Almost the same. A little more here. Almost the same. A little more. A little more. All right. Now let's take a quick look at the manifold work itself. Okay, not much to see, right? Yeah, I took a mountain of metal out of this intake manifold. The one thing that is nice about this design is you can take a mountain of metal out and not break through. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could have broke through in a few spots. I just watched it because I didn't want to do any epoxy work on this. And overall, I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. Let's take a look at some other ports. Okay, hopefully you can see something inside there. All right. Okay, you can see they were brought open to a standard Felpro gasket size, which is the same size as the head is designed at. Okay, you can see it's literally a mountain of metal had to come out of these in order to get them where I wanted them to go. Now, see this one? That was one of them you have to watch how far you can take that dog leg back because it starts to get real thin. Okay. What is kind of amazing is how close they can flow between the different designs of all these ports. Really is quite amazing. Okay, and we'll do, the straight port on the old GT. And the other port that we flowed. And our number 8 straight port on the old style manifold. So someone's going to say, who would waste this much time, effort, and energy doing this? Only probably a knucklehead like me would waste our time. Does that mean that they're not going to run good? They're going to run really, really well. Okay? Either the old GT that has a ton of manifold development work on it and epoxy, or get your hands on an exploder intake and do some work to it. This will flow out quite well, and it'll, with a decent set of flowing heads, it'll make nice power. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out. Little manifold theory, right? You gotta wonder what Ford was thinking when they design these intakes. I'm a little I don't know. I mean, take a look at this. It's just a mess. It's just an absolute mess. You got to think, was economy their real go-to point? I mean, you have to remember, before I ported this out, this had the same size opening as this GT did, and they're tiny. They're tiny openings, okay? All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Have a good night.